So some of the information that recently has been brought to bear that exposes the fact that the Noah's flood is an impossibility speaks to the aspect of rain and heat and how every raindrop that falls to earth generates heat. Every impact of rain generates heat. Now, in most situations, it's not a problem. There is not enough rain falling at a constant level that would create enough heat to really make a difference as far as the temperature of the water or the temperature of the earth. But when scientists have calculated the amount of water that it would take in order for the earth to fill with enough rain to go higher than Mount Everest, which sits at 29,000 feet and 18 feet above that, the amount of rain that it would take would literally cause all the water on the earth to boil. So therefore, that boiling water would cook Noah and all who are in the ark in a big, hot, steaming pot, as if they were lobsters thrown in the pot, and they would squeal in the same way the lobsters squeal. Now, to counter that, there are Christians out there who have spoken of the fact that the Bible says that the earth gave up its depths, gave up its water from the deep abyss. And this would sound reasonable, that all the water didn't come from above, since we know scientifically there's not enough water in the atmosphere to be able to create enough rain that would encompass the entire earth and therefore flood the earth above the 29,000 feet, Mount Everest. And many of them will look to the discoveries of ringwoodite, where ringwoodite is holding water. And if the amount of ringwoodite that they think is beneath the earth is viable, then it would represent more than 3 times the amount of water that Earth's oceans hold. And this would surely be enough. But there are 2 problems with ringwoodite. The first problem with ringwoodite is that it is unknown as to whether or not there is enough ringwoodite that would cause the earth to be flooded in such a way that they describe it. But also the fact that the transformation of ringwoodite into water, for the ringwoodite to release its water, it has to flow through the mantle stage of the earth crust. Therefore, by flowing through the mantle phase of the earth crust, 1, the water would be superheated. 2, it would erupt as it would in a volcano. And even if it wasn't volcanic eruption, just land being burst upon and the waters flowing out of the earth from different wells and springs, that water in itself would also generate a similar, if not more intense heat that the rain would create. And as that water springs up into the air and falls back down and impacts the earth, it still is generating heat. So whether or not the water is springing out from below the ground or the water is coming down from the heavens, the amount of heat that will be generated would literally boil the earth. So therefore, the flood is an impossibility for anyone to have survived it. But when we look at a few other aspects of this flood scientifically that wasn't in the webinar that I did last month. As I spoke last night on our live, a bat, any bat, consumes about 1,000 insects per day. Where were the insects? For these 2 bats to consume 1,000 insects a day for over a year, where would they have gotten the insects? Where were the insects? The Bible doesn't mention these insects. Would they have just been on the boat? There were no dead carcasses to be on the boat. There were only the 8 people and the so-called animals. Sure, a fly here and there could have made its way to the boat. A mosquito could have made its way to the boat. All types of bugs could have made their way to the boat, whether they were surviving within the wood frame or in any other aspect of the boat. But that in itself would still not be enough insects to fortify the diet of two bats, to fortify the diet of uh, anteaters or any other animal, the lizards and whatnot that consumes all these insects. So those animals that consume insects would have died. All the lizards, all the other bugs, all the other insects. And then there's insects themselves that only feed on certain plants within their habitat. There are insects that only feed on certain elements that are only within their habitat. This boat could not have carried enough of those types of food supply for all these insects in the same way that it could not carry the food supply for two elephants or two lions or two tigers, could not carry it for the two anteaters, could not carry the foliage of the two koala bears, the two sloths. And some of those would have been numbered in sevens because some of those would be considered unclean. So there would not have been two lions, there would have been seven lions. There wouldn't have been two tigers, there would have been seven tigers. But the Christian whose mind, if they're listening to this, have now gone into their state of cognitive dissonance, is rejecting this scientific information and just, but God, but God. But how would God facilitate this heat boiling water and maintain the coolness in order for these animals to live? And speaking of temperature by which the animals will live in, how would the polar bear survive in the same environment as the lion? How does the penguin survive in the same element as a cobra? Certainly one of them is going to have to die because of the huge difference in the temperatures by which they live in. How can this function? There was no cooling nor heating that was applied to this boat, constructed within this boat. And being at the height of Mount Everest, everything would have been frozen solid anyway. And one thing that I found interesting when I was researching this article is the fact that the amount of caca, the amount of poop, the amount of shit that all the animals would have been creating on a daily basis would have created, and with the ventilation only being the one window. So this is a poor state of ventilation, but only being that one window, this would have created a situation where there would have been so much methane in the air that they would have been so the boat would have smelled of disease and funk and the nastiness, the level of nastiness that would have been existing on this boat, that the eight people would not have been able to shovel the shit out that one window fast enough in order for the boat to become so gaseous with the amount of fumes coming off that shit that even if they were able to light a flame, the entire thing would have gone up in smoke. There would have been screaming of animals and the screaming of the eight people from burning to death in this methane filled fire that would have burned and destroyed everything and everyone on the ark. But the believer would refuse to accept this scientific information. They would say something in the nature of, well, God made a way. It happened, so God made a way. We have the Christian or the believer would have no empirical data that would support their claim. They would have zero scientific data that would support their claim. They would merely claim that it is the supernaturalness of God. But there is no supernatural. The supernatural is merely nature by which we have not discovered its mechanisms yet. There is nothing beyond nature. There is nothing beyond space and time. There is nothing beyond matter. It is simply a belief, a faith in something that has zero evidence. And as we continue to come to that understanding of the lack of evidence that all Christians, all believers of the Bible have, that empirical data will continue to erode this religion, erode people's belief in this religion. And finally, these people will begin to be set free from their fear of hell. They'll be set free from this fear of being tormented for all eternity in a lake of fire. Yes, they may go through being ostracized from their family, ostracized from their community, but thankfully we live in a world where we have access to one another, where we can share information, where we can gain deeper perspectives from others and reform our tribes, reform our families, and therefore still find our purpose, find our significance in society. And as the world becomes more secular, we find that it is the adaptation of secular ideas and morals, which are far better than the morals of bashing the LGBT community, of bashing and oppressing people of a different level of melanin count within their skin tone, bashing and subjecting women to the ideas of Sharia law or second class citizenship. And as those moral adaptations reign stronger within each society, those of us who have walked away will find ourselves in positions of gathering a new family. We'll find ourselves in a position to add value in what we do, add value in how we live in society. This is why they are so desperate, incredibly desperate, to co-opt your society that you live in and make that society more dominated, to be dominated by their religious ideas. This is why they want to force their religion on you. But without empirical data, with the failed promises of prophecies that consistently fail, with the fact that the morality of enslavement and oppression that reigns supreme in this religion, the exclusivity of the religion, that only their way is the way, the pathway, that they know a being that they claim is outside of time, a being that is unknowable, but yet they give it knowable characteristics, jealousy and anger, hatred. They give it love, they give it compassion. It sounds like a human creating another human. But we know that this will not work. We know that this will not stick. And because of that, we continue to forge forward in coming to our understanding and grouping and coming together as a family of people who have awakened from this dreadful nightmare of being stuck in a religion. So y'all have a great day. And always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.